And the last thing Jesus says is, I am the life. Which shows me no matter how religious or spiritual it is, it's dead without His presence. Guys, I'm telling you, I grew up in the church. My dad was a pastor all my life. I heard sermons. I went to Sunday school. I was in Christian schools. And I never met Jesus. I never met Jesus by people continually teaching me the Bible, continually telling me about Christianity, being around Christians. It just never happened. Until I saw a man who was filled with God. His name was Steve Hill. His face was shining and radiant with the presence of God. And when he spoke of Jesus, he wasn't speaking about some character like a Santa Claus. It wasn't unreality. It was like Jesus walked out of his mouth. And I met God the day that I saw Steve Hill. And I say that to you to say, the greatest gospel there is comes from those who have touched Him. This is what a testimony is. I've touched Him, He's touched me, come and see. John says this, he says, Him who we've seen, who we've heard, who we've looked at, and who we've touched with our own hands, we declare Him to you so that you too may have the same experience we have had. I remember the first time the sweetness of the Lord came and swept me off my feet. I went back to the normal, quote, chores of life, just like Cinderella. And as I was doing the normal chores of life, I started to do something just like her. So this is love. She says, so this is love. She's calling attention in the movie to a feeling she has first experienced for the first time with Prince Charming. She's looked into his eyes. She goes back to normal life, and the entirety of life now is changed because her soul, her heart is wrapped. And she says, so this is love. What I feel right now, this is love. Then she says that this is what makes life divine, she says. She says, my heart has wings and I can fly. I'll touch every star in the sky. This is the miracle that I've been dreaming of. So this is love. So this is the sweetness of God in an imagery to show what begins to happen inside of us when He comes in like the starry-eyed king that He is, looking at His bride, and He wraps her up and He takes her. And what begins to happen is everything, even the most mundane things in life, begin to have the radiance of His presence in them. I waited on the Lord, and He spoke to me. Did you hear what I just said? I waited, and He spoke. Waiting pulls the word towards you. Did you hear that? Many people wonder why there's no word in their life. What do I mean by word? There's no current speaking of God. It's because there's no waiting on the Lord. Who's got time for waiting anymore? The reality is that those who will cut out time to simply wait on the Lord, these are the ones that will receive the word of the Lord. And so I'm telling you right now that this is the sweetness that is available for us. And as I waited, the Lord spoke to me out of 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5. And I felt like He said to me, tear down all of the high things that exalt themselves against the knowing of God. What does that mean? It means there are patterns of thinking that come into our minds at times that come against your experience of God. Because the knowing of God is by experience. You take experience out, there's no knowing. So the reality is this: we all in this life have things that rise up against our experience of God. But if we're going to know Him, which you already told me that's what you want, if we're going to know Him, it makes experience non-negotiable. We must experience God. Simplicity is the name of the game. One man, Jesus, who can be seen, heard, experienced. He leads, He satisfies, He guides. He's the lover, He's the friend. He's all in all. Everything there is in God is inside of this person. There is nothing available in God outside of Christ. In Christ you have all of God, because God has put all of himself inside of Christ. So there is only one way to come to know God, and it is the simplicity of Jesus. What does that look like? Adoration. I'm telling you, when the angels look down on the earth and they see somebody whose heart goes up to God and lives going up to God, they say, he gets it. Adoration is what happens when a man has recognized who Jesus is. A lack of adoration is a lack of revelation of who he is. Because to see him is to love him. To see him is to recognize he is a giant magnet pulling every part of your being toward himself. I've had certain encounters where he came so near, and he had such a sweetness. I had all the desires in my heart being pulled towards him. The only thing that I could say was, Lord, I don't want to live anymore. I want to be with you. My entire being was being pulled towards him. And this is a wonderful analogy to explain what holiness actually is. Holiness is the giant magnet of the person of Jesus having all your attention, so that there's no vacuums of the soul looking for other things. Satisfaction in the presence of the Lord is not a perk of his presence. It's the very means by which he frees you and empowers you to be able to obey him. I'm going to say it again. Satisfaction is not just a perk of his presence. It's not a side issue, guys. Satisfaction is the very means by which he empowers you to be able to obey him. This is why he is the satisfier of the soul, Psalm 107. This is why he comes in as bread to be eaten, wine to be drank, milk as honey, sweet to the taste. He comes as an experiential reality that bursts out the soul. The soul literally combusts with joy and peace, an eruption on the inside that says, this is what I was made for. Nothing comes close. And one experience of his sweet presence is worth 1,000 years of exhaustive theology. See, the prophet tells you what he's seen, while the scribe only tells you what he read. I want to see him. I want to touch him. I want to experience him. I'm craving him. I'm salivating on the inside to experience my God again and again and live by the same. My inspiration is my past experience of him. My satisfaction is my present experience of him. And my anticipation is for my future experience of him. So that life is glory to glory, faith to faith, continually seeing his face. I'm telling you, this is the Christian life. And I want nothing less. I grew up in religion. It was repulsive to me. I didn't want nothing to do with it. You guys can go ahead and go to hell with your Bibles. That's how I felt. But the reality was I did not know God. And when I did meet God, I recognized he was so different than what was presented to me. God has sent me here to specifically shoot down patterns of thinking that have made things complex and pushed you away from the sweet experience of his person. Because if you want to know God, it's going to come by consistent living experience in him. I'm going to close with this story. This story to me is the best way to sum up what we're talking about. Jesus as the supreme one. In the book of Colossians, Paul had never been to Colossus. His friend Epaphras led them to the Lord. Paul's in prison. Epaphras is with the Colossians. He sees all these things start popping off with them. So what he does is he goes to visit Paul while Paul's in prison, and he tells him all the things that are going on with the Colossians. So Paul says, I'll write them a letter. And he writes them this letter called Colossians. And so Colossians is Paul specifically addressing the things that are going on in this city with the church. He named all kinds of strange things. Some of them are dealing with deep passions. I don't even need to explain that. They're dealing with all kinds of passions. Some of them are starting to worship God's servants and angels and things. Some of them have become so dependent upon their religious rituals, they feel like if you don't participate in the religious rituals, then you're not going to have all the things that there are in God. Some other ones were disciplining their bodies so harshly that they felt like if you weren't disciplining your body the way that they were, fasting like crazy, then you weren't going to be able to obtain the things that were in God. This is what they were doing. And then other ones were dumbfounded by wisdoms, different wisdoms. How many of you have ever seen a Christian get sidetracked by some wisdom? What do you mean a wisdom? Something that sounds good that's not specifically interaction with Jesus. That's how Paul defines it. They don't cling to the head. Jesus is the head. And so all these things are going on. And Paul has this way of dealing with all of these issues in one swoop. Do you want to know what it is? He goes on this rant about the supremacy and majesty and glory of the person of Jesus. He says he's the image of the invisible God. He's the firstborn of all creation. All things were created by Him and for Him and through Him. He says it was God's desire for the fullness of God to dwell inside of Him. He is the first. He's the last. He is all in all. He goes on this incredible rant of lifting Christ to the heights. And I wondered, why in the world would you go after all these issues with that one thing? I'm sure when they read it, they were like, well, we already know this. Why is he writing this? And then one night, I was laying down on the grass, looking up at the stars in the sky with my little girl. And she says to me, Daddy, there's so many stars in the sky. I said, yes, baby, there are. She says, where do they go in the daytime? I said, oh, baby, they're always there. It's just that the sun is so high and so bright that you cannot see them. And the Lord spoke to my heart. And He said, that's what Paul was doing. When you lift the sun to the heights, He extinguishes all the other lights. The problem in Colossians was the sun had become too low. See all kinds of other things. And this is the issue that God is wanting to do for you tonight, to bring you back again, recenter you again on the simplicity of just Him as all. Having Him, you have all.